Hello, Intro to Soc students. Professor Jordan here again. I wanted to touch base with you now that we're going to have some more substantive discussion boards coming up here throughout the rest of the semester. So I want to touch base with you on kind of decorum and the importance of how we conduct ourselves on the discussion board. And the first thing I want to say is that you should treat the discussion board as if it's something that is in class. So don't say anything on there that you wouldn't say actually in class. And I always like to say, if it's not something Mr. Rogers would say, then probably don't say it. Now, by definition, the discussion boards are going to be somewhat opinion-based, right? It's your interpretation and how you read the material and apply it in the social world that we live in here. And that's fine. That's what it is meant to be. However, there's a couple things that I do want to point out. One, we want to treat every other member of our class and our community with the respect that they deserve, right? That is by far the utmost importance. And failure to do that will result in removal from the class. Second, I think it's important to note that recently we've gotten to this perspective in our culture that people have to accept opinions from others that are about things that are subjective or objective. And that's just not the case. An opinion is something that you have about a subjective matter. This is something that we either don't have information on, it hasn't been researched yet, or as something that there's really no way to adequately decide one way or the other. It's gotten quite bright out here all of a sudden. So the first part of that is some things just, we don't have research for them. And so there's no way to form an objective statement on it. So those are things that are opinion-based, Are we ever going to make it to Mars? I think yes, at some point. Maybe other people might disagree. That's fine. And other things that are opinion-based are things that you're not really able to discern a viable outcome. My favorite color is purple. My favorite foods are a nice New York strip or lasagna. And I would say my favorite bands are Nine Inch Nails and Pink Floyd. And those are not empirical questions. You can't answer those, and I'm sure that as you're sitting there, you're thinking, well, my favorite color is this, or maybe your favorite color is purple as well, or your favorite foods are, something completely different, and that's good. I love the fact that I can drive down the street in America, and on one corner I can get shawarma, on another corner I can get a nice steak, on another corner I might be able to get some Indian or Thai food. And I think that's makes it a much more fun place to live. On the flip side of that, we've come to accept opinions based on things that there are objective facts for. And that's kind of silly, to be quite frank. And we've seen this really kind of grow over the last 30 years as more and more research has pointed to harms in our society, harms that will cost companies and people in positions of power money. Instead of dealing with them head on, the attempt is to obfuscate the reality of it. This started all the way back when I was young with smoking. Research started coming out in the 70s that smoking was bad, and then you saw it took 20, 30 years before we really started to get serious about that as a public health crisis. And you still occasionally see people argue that smoking's not that bad, I should be able to smoke in a restaurant, things of that nature. That's just silly because we know from the facts that it's wrong. Unfortunately, sometimes disciplines like sociology get the term of soft science or something like that, but that's really just a way to ignore uncomfortable results. In sociology, we use the same statistical rigor that any other discipline has. In my soc training at Ohio State, I took as many stats classes as I took sociology classes because it's paramount to be able to ground what we're doing research on in some type of provable and empirical reality, so that we can say and we can track it over time. One thing that we have a class discussion on in an in-person class is corporal punishment or spanking. Sociologists, psychologists, early childhood development specialists, educators have been studying the effects of corporal punishment and spanking on children for decades and decades and decades. And unequivocally, you can say that kids who are spanked, on average, have worse outcomes than kids that aren't. That's not a debatable fact. We see that from data going back to the 70s to today. But still, you'll have the kind of anecdotal evidence that, I was spanked and I turned out fine. My uncle told me that, and I'm like, did you really though? I've heard that with the smoking thing that, such and such smoke, they live to be 100. Well, congratulations. I'm glad that they were able to stick around that long, but that doesn't do anything to, disprove the fact that smoking causes cancer and leads to, on average, an earlier death for people. It doesn't do anything to change the fact that spanking is not an effective parenting tool, leads to poorer outcomes. So as we're reading throughout this semester, we're going to be reading about things like groups, we're going to be reading about things like social norms, we're going to be talking and reading about race, ethnicity, religious discrimination, gender, sexuality, and those things. And there are empirical facts on those. And we can look at those and see how that has impacted people over time, dating back decades. And I want to make sure that we give that research and that science the same weight that we would give any other science. And that in our discussions, we're discussing maybe the why is it this way, the how did it become this way, or the where do we go, what can we possibly do to mitigate some of these effects. You could even argue that it doesn't matter. Yeah, I see that there's discrimination, and I think it's just fine. That's a viable opinion to have, and we're certainly welcome that perspective as well. But we're not going to pretend like the problem doesn't exist when we have clear, compelling scientific evidence to say and show that it does. So let's make sure that we're doing that and enjoy the discussion boards. Hopefully you guys engage there and are able to challenge each other so that we can learn and internalize and remember these concepts going forward throughout the rest of the semester and hopefully into the rest of your academic career and personal life. Have a nice day, and more soon. It didn't turn off again. It never does on the first click.